Hello and welcome back to Ponder Policy. Today we're going to be looking at the 2024 election and what the possibility for a Democratic trifecta would look like. Now, a trifecta is when one party, in this case the Democrats, win on the presidential, House, and Senate levels all in the same election, which would give them a lot of power in terms of furthering their political agenda, at least until the 2026 presidential midterms. Now, that being said, I don't think this is the most likely outcome, but it is certainly possible, and I want to look at the various races that are going to be important to keep an eye on, and the various factors that will go into deciding how these three fields play out. For starters, in the House, the Hill's forecast currently gives Republicans a 61% chance of winning the House of Representatives. Republicans currently hold the House by a very slim margin, so they are slightly favored to win at this point, with only about 20 to 25 truly toss-up seats listed in this prediction. Other models have anywhere else in that range. You see in Cook Political Report will have ratings that still give about this 20 to 25 toss-up seat range, where due to districting and the partisan lead of many districts, most districts in the country are already accounted for. We already know who's going to win on the House level. So looking at some of these districts, I don't want to get too in-depth, but in terms of a strictly electability standpoint, a lot of these toss-up districts also have a very much decided race already. All the incumbent representatives have an inherent advantage, whether they be Democrat or Republican, because they have a lot of power behind them, having already won an election within their district. In New Jersey's 7th, I think Kane is going to win this race by probably 1 to 3 points. Across the border in Pennsylvania, in both Districts 8 and District 7, these two districts have incumbent Democrats, which gives them a large amount of name recognition within the district, but given that Biden had a lot of pull in this area, these Democrats did very well in the previous two elections, and I wouldn't be entirely surprised, even if one of these districts is favored for Democrats, the other for Republicans at the moment. I wouldn't be entirely surprised if Democrats are possibly able to win both of these districts, giving them another step towards a Democratic majority in the House. Some other races, depending on your report, these two districts, District 9 and District 13 in northern Ohio, are either lean Democrat or toss-up. I suspect, just given the closer nature of the Senate race there, that these are going to go Democrat. There's going to be a higher voter turnout. Nebraska's second, even though Don Bacon, the incumbent Republican, has a lot of advantages, he would have to outrun Trump within the district by a few percentage points in order to hold his seat. I'm not going to get into a lot of these other toss-up districts, but know that Democrats definitely do have a chance of winning the House, and even if Republicans are slightly favored, it's only slightly at this point in the race. Democrats can certainly take the House in 2024. Going on to the Senate race, most states in this cycle that are competitive have incumbent Democratic senators, which gives Democrats an advantage in that sense, but also Republicans an advantage in terms of they have much more ground to attack and less to defend. So just looking at this map, Republicans are already favored in Texas and Florida by pretty substantial margins. This is Ted Cruz and Rick Scott, respectively. These two races are kind of off the table, and if you want to look at a Democratic trifecta scenario where Harris wins on the presidential level, Democrats need 50 seats in the Senate to be able to obtain a Senate majority, having Harris's inevitable VP pick be able to break that tie. All of these remaining seats are territory for Democrats to defend. All have incumbent Democratic senators, and Democrats are heavily favored to win most of these, and I'll get into that. Currently in New Jersey, even though the race had some shakeups with Bob Menendez, the incumbent senator, listing himself as an independent, Democrats running their own candidate, I think Curtis Bashaw in New Jersey hasn't run the best campaign within the state, so it's more than likely going to be going Democrat pretty safely. Larry Hogan is probably the most electable option for the Republicans in Maryland, given that the state went to Biden by 33 points in 2020. It's just a large barrier for any Republican to be able to win statewide. In Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, I think Wisconsin would be the closest of these three. All have incumbent Democratic senators, all being relatively popular, given that these are swing states, and I suspect that even if Wisconsin make it very narrow, that these three states are going to be going to Democrats by over a point. Over into Arizona, where Kari Lake is now the GOP nominee after the Arizona primary, and Kari Lake is not a very electable name in Arizona, having lost her previous governor's contest in 2022, contesting the results there. I suspect her to underperform Trump within the state, so Trump could even win Arizona and have Kari Lake lose because Ruben Gallego is just seen as a much more electable figure against Kari Lake in that race compared to Donald Trump versus Kamala Harris. So I would put Arizona as a lean Democratic state at the moment. Moving on to Nevada, where you have polls generally in the state overestimate Republicans slightly. So I think some of the polling that shows Democrats ahead within the state, mostly believable, and that might even expand their lead. Democrats are probably favored in Nevada at the moment. That gives Democrats 48 seats in the Senate to Republicans 50, with the pathway to a Democratic Senate majority going through Ohio and Montana. These are two states that Donald Trump in the previous two elections, 2016 and 2020, won by pretty substantial margins. Donald Trump won in Ohio by over 8 points in both elections, and Montana by 15 to 20 points in both elections. Both of these states have incumbent Democratic senators and are going to be the focus of the GOP in trying to take a Senate majority back in this election. The Democratic pathway to 50 senators really relies on these two states. Ohio currently, even though Trump is polling very well within the state on the presidential level, on the Senate level, Sherrod Brown is currently outpolling his opponent by roughly 6 points. You have Bernie Moreno at about 45.7%, Brown currently polling, at least on the Hill's projection, at 52%. And while this may come down by election day, especially given that split ticketing isn't usually as pronounced as polls would like to suggest, I would still suspect that Brown is able to retain his seat in Ohio, probably by a lean margin. And even if Republicans win here in House races, even if Donald Trump wins Ohio by over 8 points, potentially even over 10 points, Brown, with a lot of split ticketing, may be able to retain his seat in Ohio. Montana is going to be a much harder state for Democrats because incumbent Senator Jon Tester, very electable candidate in Montana, able to win consecutive elections in such a deep red state. Currently, his opponent, Sheehy, has a 4-point lead on him, but during this election cycle, Tester has led in polls at times, having 2 separate occasions where he's up in polls across the state. And while a lot of Republican money is being funneled towards this campaign to get Sheehy elected, it's still only netted a 4-point lead for Sheehy relative to Trump's 15 to 20 point expected margin within the state. So even though Tester is a really good candidate for Democrats, and I definitely wouldn't count him out in terms of being able to retain this seat, I do think Sheehy is currently favored, but that's not to say that Tester is not able to win Montana by over a point. This would be a map that gets Democrats that next leg in the trifecta, and ultimately, if Harris were to win the presidency, this is the map for the Senate election that would give Democrats control of the Senate as well. Going over to the presidential level, Kamala Harris has reassured a lot of Democratic voters, especially in traditionally Democratic states, that had become more competitive when Biden was still at the top of the ticket. I would expect Harris to retain support in Minnesota, in New Hampshire, and in Virginia pretty easily. Harris shores up support across these 3 states, not making the National Democratic Party have to spend a lot of money here, whereas with Biden on the top of the ticket, it was not entirely likely that Trump would win these states, but there is certainly a lot more attention paid to them. Trump is still favored in North Carolina, and even though there's some polls showing a closer rating in Georgia, I would still expect Trump to win by over a point within the state. In Arizona, Republicans have regained a lot of ground. Voter registration for Republicans here is still very good, and I still think that Trump is certainly favored to win Arizona, but it might be by a narrower margin than he would have if Biden was on the ticket. Nevada is a different case because, especially with the Senate race being much more favorable to Democrats, Harris may be helped within the state, whereas Biden was likely to lose Nevada. It's much more competitive with Harris at the top of the ticket. And I would say that even in this election, Harris can win by over a point in Nevada. This was a state that stayed with Clinton, stayed with Biden, both by over 2 points. So it's unlikely, even though voter demographics are shifting within the state, if there's a large enough turnout from the Las Vegas area, and potentially if the Reno area stays with Democrats, even if it's only by a point or 2, Democrats have a ticket to victory within Nevada. And I can see Democrats having a chance at Arizona, a chance at Georgia, maybe not North Carolina, but Nevada is definitely the most likely in the Sun Belt to stay with the Democrats in this election. And ultimately, the Harris pathway to the presidency lies in the Rust Belt. This was a strategy that the Biden campaign was hinging on, and I think the same rings true with Harris. Ultimately, Pennsylvania is going to be a state that's a must-win for Democrats with its 19 electoral votes, along with Michigan. Michigan was won by Democrats in 2020 by the largest margin, and won by Donald Trump in 2016 by the smallest margin in the previous two elections, and it's the most left-leaning of these three Rust Belt states. And it's not entirely impossible that Harris, if her momentum continues, is able to win Michigan in a scenario like this by over a point. Pennsylvania could also get there, but I find it unlikely without the same appeal that Joe Biden had to especially voters in Scranton and that eastern part of Pennsylvania. I find it unlikely that a Democratic victory within Pennsylvania can resemble the same 1.2% win that Biden had in 2020. Wisconsin, even though polling more than any state in the union probably overrepresents Democrats, this is not a state that's off the table for Democrats. It was won by Biden by 0.6%. Voter demographics within the state are shifting, but that's not to say that Democrats don't have a chance within Wisconsin, and I would give this a tilt rating in this election cycle in a scenario where Harris is able to win, along with Nebraska second, probably by over a point. And this is a very likely scenario if you want to model a Harris victory on the presidential level, that if she were to win, I would expect the electoral map to look something similar to this. Potentially some play with the Sunbelt states. Their campaign is starting to make efforts there in states like Arizona, Georgia, and Nevada. Rallies being held in North Carolina too. And those certainly aren't off the table, but I still think Trump is expected to do fairly well in the Sunbelt at this moment. So the Harris campaign really hinges on how well she is able to perform in the Rust Belt and be able to retain that blue wall that so many Democratic campaigns in the past have built up. So what we have here is the foundation for what a Democratic trifecta would look like. I don't think this is the most realistic outcome for this election, but it certainly is possible. If an outcome like this does happen, then Democrats do get a lot of control in furthering their policy agenda in at least the next 2 years until the midterms, and potentially beyond that. Having a Democratic president, a Democratic Senate, and a Democratic House, where Democrats only need to make up a small amount of ground in order to flip the House too. A trifecta is not off the table in this election. And even though I would expect Republicans are probably favored to win at this moment, favored to win either the House or the Senate, potentially both, and there's not enough polling at the presidential level to really make an accurate prediction yet, Democrats still have a pathway to be able to obtain a Senate majority, a House majority, and retain the presidency for Democrats. And holding that trifecta would have a lot of policy implications in the coming years. So let me know what you think down in the comments below. Make sure to like and subscribe, and thank you for watching.